home from school and said, I want to play the violin, and my parents said, okay, if you practice. And then, of course, I didn't practice. No, I did a bit, but but it sort of all started there. And I realised once I got to year 12 that I didn't really want to be doing anything else, so kept at it, basically.
Where did you grow up?
In Melbourne.
In Melbourne, okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. And of course you're a Taswegian now. So how are you surviving things in lockdown at the moment?
Well, we're almost not in lockdown anymore because we haven't had any cases here for, I think it's 56 days now. No new cases. So that moat is really working for us. But look, it's been very strange, and obviously, despite things being a little bit easier around the streets and in everyday life, it's certainly not easier for the arts and for culture in general. And every day more impediments seem to come up against us, and as much as you try to think of a solution, there's always a problem. So it's tricky times, having to think outside the box creatively, and even being creative sometimes is tricky when you can't actually do what you do. But I think we're a lot better off here than in Melbourne. So I feel I can't complain.
Yeah, great. So you went to school in Melbourne, and you finished year 12, and you knew you didn't want to do anything else but play the violin. That's fantastic. So where did you end up studying after school?
I studied at the Victorian College of the Arts with Miwako Abe, a fantastic violin teacher, and I did my degree there. I was already starting to be quite interested in the Baroque violin from around second year, but everybody's advice was you should finish your modern degree first. So I did that, and then I went on to do an honours year. And when they offered me the place, I said, could I possibly swap to Baroque violin? And so I think I was probably the first Baroque violin student at the VCA, and studied with Lucinda Moon, which was amazing. She's such a great teacher. So that was an excellent start. And then, I did a couple of years with her, started working professionally, and then I sort of felt like I just needed a little bit more, of something. I was sort of 23 years old, and I thought, I just don't feel like I've quite gone far enough with this. So I decided to move overseas and study over there.
Yeah, interesting. And so when you were studying on Baroque violin, was it that's still at the VCA with Lucinda?
Yes.
Sort of a post-grad? Yeah.
And I did honours, so I did 2 years for an honours.
Okay, great. And were there many, like you said, you were probably the first student studying early violin there. Outside of the college, was there much going on at that time, or?
No, I mean, the early music studio had started up at Melbourne Uni. In those days, we were still quite separate at the VCA. It had just amalgamated, I think, but it didn't feel like it yet. And so there were a few people at the con doing early instruments, but it was still very early days, and it was less, I'd say it was probably less accessible as well back then, because you couldn't, one of the greatest resources for people now for Baroque music is IMSLP and being able to access digital content. Even, you can go to the Bibliothèque Nationale in France and look at the Gallica manuscripts, which is just such a luxury that, back then in the late 90s, that wasn't possible. So it was much more, in some ways, it was much more challenging to get hold of material and to find out about things. There weren't as many recordings, and, so it was a lot more detective work. I guess a lot of people were daunted by that. Even just the idea of sourcing Baroque strings and stuff, it was just a little bit harder than it is now. So it was a very small niche number of musicians, and we were sort of all over Australia. So that it was sort of hard to have a group even in any one place.
Right.
The Brandenburg Orchestra was running, and I was playing with them. But apart from that, there were the odd sort of small trio sonata groups or something like that. But yeah, getting a big group together was a tricky thing. You'd have to definitely get people from interstate, etc.
Yeah, okay. And so when you looked to go and study overseas, what was sort of what was the catalyst? Was there a particular teacher or a particular school that really caught your eye that you were interested in?
Yeah, Lucinda lent me a CD of Enrico Gatti playing, and it's a CD called Musica ad tempo di Guido Reni, so music of the time of Guido Reni, the artist, and it's a whole collection of 17th century repertoire, which was something I was totally unfamiliar with. I'd sort of tried reading through some Cima, I remember when I was at the VCA, but it was just such a foreign world, such a different language, musical language. And I heard this. There's one piece in particular that was some diminutions by Rognoni on a Palestrina work, and I just remember hearing him playing, and it just sort of at that point, I just made the decision right there and then, I have to learn from this player. I loved the sound. I loved his, he has the most amazing right hand articulation, and it's a very vocal sound. And it just, sometimes something really connects with you, and that's how I felt. And so I didn't know anything about Enrico Gatti. I had no idea where he lived or if he taught the violin or anything. Obviously, he sounded like he was Italian. But that's about all I could deduce at first. And so when I went overseas, I kind of went on a bit of a search for him. And my first stop was London because I had family there, and I just sort of used that as my base and then started working out what to do from then. But yeah, that was he became my teacher eventually after a few different steps. But yeah, and he was teaching in The Hague at that time, so that's what took me there.
So then you're in Holland, and how long did you spend in Holland?
Well, I studied there for 3 years, but I only lived there for 1, and I lived in Paris for the other 2 years and took the train. I had a partner who was French, so I decided, and I to be quite honest, I just didn't really like The Hague. I didn't really like living there.
Fair enough.
It was a good place to study, and you do work hard. You work hard because there's not a lot to do. But yeah, it was, and the conservatorium was amazing. It's such a melting pot of different cultures, and but yeah, I was quite happy to move somewhere else and come back from my lessons. And Enrico was very regular with his lessons as well. He'd set them out at the beginning of the year, so it was very easy to plan to just come every 2 weeks to uni. And I don't think it's so easy to do that anymore. I think quite a few people started doing it, so they've made it more difficult now. But at the time, that really suited me because I could just drop in and drop out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite a tradition. There's been a lot of Aussies I can think of that have studied there as well, so it's obviously got a lot going for it. And when you first got there, was there anything that immediately struck you, having obviously done undergraduate and things like that? And when you come to an institution like that, was there any sort of immediate musical culture shock, or was it just nice to be immersed in things? Or
I think as soon as you get to Europe, you realise that you've been, in a very small pond, basically, and what's really interesting is that, as I said, there are a lot of different cultures there, particularly in the early music department. We were 160 students when I was there, and of that 160, only 2 of them were Dutch. And there were a lot of people from Australia, Japan, and South America, interestingly enough, and then all over Europe. So it seemed that there was some kind of cultural connection to the Baroque aesthetic, and I can really understand that. For example, with the Japanese aesthetic, I can see a lot of correlation there because it's all about the fine detail and the beauty. They always strive for the most beautiful thing, even if it's only going to be, like you think about a plate of food in Japan, and it's going to be destroyed. So it only exists for a short time, but they still take a lot of time to make it beautiful to look at as well as to eat. So I can see why the Japanese would be interested. I have no idea what it is about Australian culture or the way we are that draws us to that, but there were a heck of a lot of Australians actually, and we were sort of referred to as the Australian mafia over there. And yeah, I still haven't got to the bottom of that one, but there's something about that style of music that seems to connect with a lot of people here. So it's really interesting. But yeah, I realised that there were a lot of people doing this. I realised just how much there was to learn and how endless the repertoire is, which is both a great thing and a sort of a very daunting thing. For instance, aren't we glad that there's so many Bach cantatas? But then when you look at the works of lesser-known composers and how many there are that are not published, it's just, it's just this massive can of worms, lots of material to work with, which is great. That's why I love it, because there's so much undiscovered stuff still.
Fantastic. And so you obviously, really, obviously you're such a talented lady anyway, but being a young, talented player in Europe, there must have been a lot of opportunities opening up for you to play with various ensembles. Can you tell us a little bit about what was going on at that time?
Yeah, sure. Well, like anywhere, it takes a while to settle into a place, and as I said, I decided to settle in France rather than in Holland, so I moved there a year later. So I started off I had a year and a half in London, it was sort of 9 months actually only in Holland, and then went on to France. So the first few years it was tricky because nobody, you have to kind of get to know people, and because I wasn't studying in France as well, that added another layer of trickiness. But yeah, I just kind of wrote to people and met people and played with people, and eventually you get sort of into the scene. So and also through the people I met in France, and then also through some of the people I knew from The Hague, I started getting work in different countries as well. So towards the end of my time in Europe, I was working a lot in Italy with Alan Curtis as well. And that was, now how did that happen? That was because I'd worked with a Belgian group and somebody in that group was running the band. So, you sort of, eventually it starts being work kind of here, there and everywhere. I didn't work in the early music scene at all in England though. That seems to be quite a different scene. So I was very much kind of continental in my work. That wasn't any choice, it was just the way it was. Yeah. But it was great. Like in France in particular, you get to play, because they're so proud of their heritage, their musical heritage. They spend a lot of money on putting on productions of French composers and rediscovering. I spent a lot of time at the CMBV, the Centre de Musique de Baroque de Versailles, and that there was heaps of really interesting stuff going on. For example, I was part of the first project that used a a set of 24 violins that was constructed entirely to replicate the 24 violins of Louis XIV. So that was really exciting to play. I was actually playing the regular old violin for that project, but there were real haute contre violins, and then the quintus and the taille were also different sized instruments, and they constructed them especially. So
wow,
it was amazing. That was amazing to be able to do that, and lots of great repertoire that probably you wouldn't hear here very often in Australia. So that was it was really really nice to discover some quite rarefied stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. And in relation just to a little bit about the instruments, you just touched on there, like how specialised obviously the Baroque violin is, and I know particularly for me as a trumpet player, there's a big difference between, say, the bell you want to use for instrument from 1600 to the bell you want to use for the Handel and Bach and things like that. So with the violin, what would say the main differences be over that period? Or
well, the instrument didn't change very much. The bridge did a little bit through from the 16th. Late 16th century for violin is about where it started, and then from at that point, the tool, in fact, the tool that changed the most was the bow, not the violin itself. So there are so many different shapes of bows, and they really indicate the way that the bow was used. So the early bows are sort of like sticks. Really, they really are like a stick with a bit of horsehair attached, and they were sort of literally tied on in the early stages, and then eventually it became more and more refined. But even, what I find really interesting to think about is, and I bring this up all the time, is that, for example, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart would have learnt Baroque violin, because all of the things that were changing later than they were. So, for example, a new model of bow that came in 1772 would probably not have been in the mainstream until much later. And certainly orchestras were using Baroque bows right into the mid-70s. Everyone's a bit obsessed with using the right bow for the right time, but actually they were just experimenting all the time, and there was no standardization. And I think that's the big difference between the way we make music now and what they were doing back then. I'm sure you feel the same way with trumpet, because in each country they were using a different machine, so it was the same. There was no kind of standard shape for violins. There was no standard bow.
No cross-pollination of things.
Yeah. So but saying that, one of the things that I the biggest differences, I think, in playing through from the 16th, 17th century right through to the classical period, was the bow technique, and I think that probably changed quite considerably when you think that they sort of went from an overhand French style where they held on top of the frog. The thumb was on top of the frog, but that was sort of limiting. So they eventually went, and I must say I've never experimented with the finger on top of the frog much. I mean, certainly not in performance. I've tried it out at home in private, but yeah, it would be an interesting thing to explore, actually, because it does really change the way you play. So yeah, the bow and the bow technique are the biggest differences. Everyone gets obsessed with chin on and chin off. I think it's good to learn chin off, but just to know how that affects the way you use the left hand. But the biggest difference is the right hand, I think.
Okay.
mostly.
Oh, that's great. Great to know. And obviously, there were some very famous makers during the Baroque, with your Stradivaris and all these sort of other things or whatever. Do you want to tell us a little bit about maybe the violin you're playing on at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So my violin actually used to belong to Enrico Gatti, so it was the instrument that I heard in that original recording. So there's a nice sort of feeling of completion with all of that. My instrument's Italian. It's an anonymous instrument. When I say anonymous, it does actually have a label in it, but it's probably not what it says it is. It says it's a Storioni. If it was a Storioni, I wouldn't have been able to afford it, basically. So it's possibly got a little bit of Storioni in there somewhere, but it's the table and the back and the ribs are all from different makers, and so is the scroll. So they call it a Harlequin instrument, and it's, I sort of romantically say maybe it was made up of stolen parts or something. because it's very odd. It was actually varnished at the time, so it's okay. Late 18th century, and it was varnished in Cremona at the time. So somebody's they've just mixed it up basically. So yeah.
Yeah, sweet.
So sorry, just to make sure that the kids didn't bust in.
Oh, that's all right. We're very inclusive here. Queensland. we like kids and everyone, animals, whatever you've got.
Actually, we're all big kids, aren't we?
Exactly.
That's
it helps play better Baroque music, actually. And what about your bow? You have several bows, I imagine.
Yeah, I have. How many bows do I have? I've got 4 main bows that I use. So I've got the kind of primitive type stick bow, and then I've got a bow that is a copy of a 1650 painting. So that's the bow that I use for Corelli as well, and a lot of Italian music. It's got a quick action. It's very lively bow, and then I've got a bow from it's a model of an English bow from the 1720s, which has got quite a lot of suppleness in the stick, and it's quite a long bow, so it works very well for Bach and Handel and Rameau and the later Baroque composers. And then I've got a classical bow, which I bought in France. It was a lucky find, actually, because I was working with a violinist called Patrick Cohen-Akinine, and he had got a copy of another, I think it's an English model as well, with what's called the Kramer head. So that's the first kind of hammerhead bow that was made, and it's from the 1770s. And he'd got a copy made of an original, and then the original came up for sale, so I bought his copy, which was very lucky. So they're my main bows. I don't get my modern. In fact, I sold my modern violin, and I have a modern bow, but I don't use it very often.
Oh, that's cool. And so, when you on a typical day, if you had sort of, if you didn't have too many sort of administrative and mum duties and things to worry about, if you could be really selfish and just only have to worry about the violin and a bit of practice and things, what would a practice day look like for Julia?
I would just, that's a nice dream to have a day like that. So I would probably play some solo Bach. I feel like solo Bach is very much something for oneself. I almost feel like they're not meant to be performed somehow. I don't know why, but I think that they have a different quality when you're just playing in a room on your own. So I'd probably play a bit of that, but I reckon I'd spend a bit of time playing 17th century diminution licks, because I would love to. I was thinking about that today again, and with lockdown everywhere else and everything sort of being on hold, it's actually a good opportunity to pull out some of those treatises which have, they literally have, they're like jazz licks, but they're written out, and on this cadence you could do this, and I'd love to just drill them so that I could have them on hand, or at least something that resembles them on hand, like cornetto players do. Cornetists are always much better than violinists, I reckon, at doing that, but probably because they're so focused on one specific repertoire.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They've only played about 3 different keys, and they've only got 7 holes to worry about. So
yeah. So that would probably be another thing I'd love to do is just and the other thing I'm looking into is funnily enough, I'm going to be doing some work with another couple of violinists down here, playing more experimental stuff with microphones and loop pedals and that kind of thing, and doing sort of effects with that with the Baroque violin, and also I've got a piece that I love written by an Icelandic composer with a sort of backing track, so it's solo violin. And I was thinking this morning, I might actually see if I can get some more of those pieces, because it's a way of playing a solo piece that doesn't feel like a solo piece. And maybe try and put together a program like that as well. So, because I just think that small groups are going to be the way things go for the next couple of years. And at least then, if it's a small group, there's not too much of the audience taken away. You know what I mean? If there's too many people on stage, you can't have anyone in the audience. So the other thing I'm working on is at the moment, and going to be recording on Tuesday, is some of the Leclerc violin duos, which are really great pieces. I'm working on those with Jennifer Owen from the TSO, and we've recorded a few of them for the TSO Daily Dose. So that's what I'm practicing at the moment. That's fun too.
And you mentioned, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and his violin playing. Of course, his father wrote a violin treatise, and it very much would have been relevant to Baroque. Is that part of your standard kind of treatise that you would,
absolutely,
rely on?
It's funny. All of the treatises are written by real pedants, and he is an example of the true pedant. It's such an amusing read. Leopold Mozart, this is. It's hilarious, and I mean, you can sort of see in the language how much of a taskmaster he would have been with his kids. My goodness. but it's full of gold. It's gold. All of that. I mean, that's all we have to go on as well, John. Like, we can't, as you know, we can't listen to recordings. We can't watch the way people played. So we have to literally go on a description with words, which is, I mean, it's all conjecture what we come up with, and could be completely wrong. Who knows? But yeah, so it's Gemignani. For me, it's Gemignani and Leopold Mozart that are the sort of, for violin playing, they're kind of the most important, I would say. And then probably Riccardo Rognoni as well, just because he has a lot of bowings in his arrangements or his diminutions, and I find that really interesting, because there's a lot of kind of, it's dots and a slur over the top, so we don't really know what that means. But I think, the way I interpret it is rearticulated slurs, which is something that you don't use much. It's sort of an effect in modern playing, but it's quite a vocal sound, actually. So yeah, those are they're probably my 3 go-tos. There's a whole heap of them. It wasn't Spes. Fuso Editions released all of the violin treatises, and it's 3 volumes worth. There's heaps of them. Lots of interesting stuff to be learnt.
Yeah, I'm a big believer myself in just, crossing the streams, and, I want all my trumpet students to read things from other instruments, and I think it's all wonderfully relevant. So just interested to hear what you thought. Would you look at, say, Quantz or one of these sort of winds?
Yes, I've also, yeah, of course, quants and CPE Bach as well are very important, particularly in the interpretation of ornaments and agréments, because they describe them really well, particularly quants. I find quants explains everything so clearly. So, yeah, I definitely use those as well. But that's for obviously not so much for technical things, it's more for style. But, yeah, they're also really, really important. And there's a few modern day books that I've found really useful. I mean, everyone knows Judy Tarling's book. It's great because if there's one sort of simple thing you want to look up and see an appraisal from different people, it's everything's in one place. And I've all of the other interesting things, like I've got Donington, and there's a whole lot of new books written about the style which are really interesting as well. There's heaps of stuff to read.
Yeah. I just want to ask you a little bit about just the feeling of gesture that I see you play with a lot of the time, which is just seems to really go hand in hand with what I'm hearing on this when I listen to you play, and the sense of breath in the phrasing and all those sort of things. Is there anything that you would tell young players, particularly who are looking into the Baroque violin, obviously compared to a modern orchestra, where we're sitting there, obviously we're standing a lot more of the time playing early music. Is there anything around that you would advise them on in terms of? Because I mean, obviously you've got the bowing to worry about, and if you're leading or if you're not, I mean, there's a lot of very subtle and not so subtle things that need to happen.
When you spend time learning the right hand technique with the bow, it's a lot of the way it works is very much sort of going with gravity. So the strong bow is the down, and so that kind of helps things to happen naturally, I find. A lot of the phrasing and the articulation comes from that. So it's the sort of the weight in the arm and using gravity to help, basically.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing, I think, and it was quite a breakthrough when it took a while. Particularly when you're younger and you're feeling more self-conscious, it's very difficult to let the breath kind of lead your whole body. In some ways, we're resistant to that, and you sort of feel self-conscious. But once you do, breathe in as though you're about to sing the phrase, and literally almost be singing it inside, but then channeling it through the instrument. And it sounds really kind of hippie, but it's exactly what you have to do, because you can't get the gestures right if you're not singing it inside your body. And it will always be unnatural if you don't do that. So I am I'm a very strong believer, and it's amazing how many people don't breathe when they play an instrument. I mean, obviously you can't play the trumpet without breathing. That's something you don't need to teach your students. But anyone that plays a string,
they try.
Anyone that plays a string instrument often forgets to breathe. It's a thing, so my students, if anyone is watching, would be laughing, because the thing I say the most often is, can you breathe, please? You need to breathe. Breathing is good. Breathing helps in every way. It also keeps you alive. But it literally, for me, the breath shapes the phrasing, when I play the violin. And when I realised that, for me, it was a really big personal breakthrough. And I mean, particularly in Baroque music, because the thing is that in later music, when you play the violin, you're being a violin. Whereas when you're playing Baroque violin, you're meant to be the violin being a voice. And that's the big difference.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice, Julia. Thank you. And of course, you've got at least two groups that I know of going on down there in Tasmania, Latitude and Van Diemen's band. Can you tell us a little bit about, obviously you're the founder and leader of Van Diemen's band, and what your sort of thought for wanting to start that ensemble was, and what your vision is for where you'd like to see things go in the future?
So Van Diemen's Band, I started that mainly because there wasn't really anything going on. There wasn't a Baroque orchestra here. The TSO had played a little bit of Baroque music, and that obviously been a bit of a hit, especially back in the Geoffrey Lancaster days. But when the year I moved here was the first Hobart Baroque, and that was just quite by chance. It felt extremely serendipitous. It's a shame we didn't keep going. But anyway, so after doing 2 of those Hobart Baroques, I realised how receptive the audience was to that music here, and how much they love live performance, because there isn't as much going on. And I've since come to discover that Tasmanians really value culture, and they love going to concerts. So it was sort of a no-brainer. I thought, well, why not in the void that was left by Hobart Baroque, why not start an orchestra? And I literally was driving down the road one day and thought Van Diemen's Band. Oh, that's quite a good name.
Very good, yeah.
So it kind of went from there, and I've been lucky because I've had a lot of really great people to help behind the scenes. I've got a really excellent committee, and the TSO has been really supportive, and so it's sort of right place, right time. And we've been doing a lot of regional touring up until COVID-19 happened. And the audience is just so hungry for it. So it's really nice. It feels like we're doing something that's really needed. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, fabulous. And of course, I've heard a few of your recording projects and things you've had going on as well. So, it sounds like, it's a very exciting time for you guys. Let's just hope this COVID thing blows over fairly soon, and you can get back to everything that you did.
We're lucky because we actually did 2 recordings in a row late last year, and they're going to be coming out, one this year, one next. The one this year is going to be in September. That's with David Greco singing Bach cantatas, and then next year is with the Swedish label Bis doing Handel Concerti Grossi Opus 3. So at least if we're not doing anything else, we're releasing some recordings. So that's something.
Everyone has to go out and download or buy those albums.
That's right, exactly.
That's it. She's got kids to feed. We've got to sell lots of albums. And I'm just wondering if we might have a few questions that have come in while we're going on, but I'm not quite sure how to access that. Let me.
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
Hi.
The link I gave you. Are you on your iPad?
I've got a computer here.
All right. Yeah. Well, go to the link I gave you. Click on it and into it, and then you'll come to the live chat.
Thanks, Kathy.
So Andrew Cole said hi.
Oh, hello, Andrew Cole. Nice to see you. Nice to hear from you. Nice to know you're watching. Okay.
So go to live chat rather than top chat. Jackie Webber's here, or Jacqueline.
Jacqueline. Hi, Jacqueline.
So Jackie says, Julia, so lovely to see you after Chaos and Chasms. Feels so long ago.
Yeah, gosh, that was a while ago.
And Nancy, who's a friend of mine from Washington State, she's had to go because you've got the live chat? Yeah, there's top chat and live chat, right. So pop out live chat like a boss.
Oh,
yeah, you want to turn off the volume.
Yeah, definitely turn off the volume too, yeah.
So you got Jackie's latest question about going over the treatises again?
Let me just find where the live chat thing is. So, top chat. Live chat, there we go. Got it. Okay.
All right, I'll shut up again.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Kathy. So, Julia, Jacqueline was just wondering if we could mention some of those treatises again so that she can jot them down.
Yep. So the main ones would be Leopold Mozart. That one is called The Art of Violin Playing, I think. And then Gemignani is The Art of Playing on the Violin. Leopold Mozart is just on playing the violin. I think I can't remember the actual titles. And then the Quantz is on playing the flute. And C.P. Bach is what's the title of that one? I forget. I think that's just a keyboard treatise. Who else? Oh yes, Riccardo Rognoni. But both of the Rognoni brothers, were they brothers or father and son? I think father and son. They both did. I think one of them's called Selva di Vari Passaggi or something like that. But I haven't got them off in the top of my head, so I could just post a link if you like or something to some of those. But they're the main ones that I use. And then Judy Tarling is a really good reference, which that puts everything together. What I find really useful in Judy Tarling is she has a chapter on the character of the different key signatures, and she puts what everybody's said about each key, and I find that really useful because obviously in the Baroque period that was thought of differently, and each key was seen to have its own characteristics. I hope that was slow enough. But I might. Yeah.
So when you're looking, say different repertoire, let's just go with Bach. And got to do a Bach cantata. Depending on, would you look at, depending on say the key of the piece or the general mood of the cantata, would you look at different temperaments for those pieces?
No.
What's your general go-to temperament?
Well, with temperament, it depends what you're playing. So sometimes, with Bach, with Latitude 37, for example, we often use Werkmeister, but apparently Bach hated Werkmeister. The temperament that I often end up using with Bach is young, young temperament, because it's quite an equal temperament, and because Bach uses so many different keys. Of course, there's this sort of Bach temperament as well, which I've used sometimes,
the layman Bach.
Yeah, but I as a violinist, I will usually take advice from keyboard players because they are the ones that feel it much more than we do. I am pretty used to shifting to different temperaments, and certainly between strings, say in an orchestra, you really need to be trying to play more in tune with each other, and then the temperament should be, the keyboard temperament should not necessarily dictate the intonation of the larger group, because then you're playing out of tune, So the temperament ends up being sort of a global thing that blends in well with the general intonation of the ensemble. So I mean, unless you're playing sonatas where it's just you and the keyboard, and then of course you have to adapt. But if it's orchestra, I tend not to judge everything by what I'm hearing on the keyboard. I think you need to also think about the harmony and tune it according to the harmony. And, also interestingly enough, the Baroque composers often used key signatures or key changes to cause an effect. So, you know, if you go into C sharp minor, it sounds difficult. I mean, it sounds like hard work, and I think that's what they're wanting in some way, because, as a temperament, in a temperament, C sharp minor is pretty well always horrible.
Oh no,
so,
absolutely. Yeah. You listen to some early organ composers, like, you know, if it's Frescobaldi or Sweenley chords and stuff, and it's really crunchy, but it's also great. It's also so great.
Awesome. When you're starting to get a bit of a beat happening, you can sort of you can feel that, you can sense that it's something that they actually were aiming for. So whereas we're so obsessed with just intonation these days, and you know, we just maybe need to, of course, things need to be in tune, and they were very aware. If you go and have a look at Gemignani, he describes what the difference between a sharp and a flat is, for example, and they are very different. Which is that's not in the lexicon for equal temperament. It's, you know, they're both the same. So that's an interesting thing to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even when you look at split key organs and things like that, you know that they were thinking, obviously, you know, different sharps and flats. So it's no problem at all. Okay, so you'd like to.
Mean tone's one of my favourite temperaments, but you never play in C sharp minor pretty well in 17th century repertoire, so it's not a problem. Right. So it's so bright and beautifully in tune. You know, so resonant when you're in a simple key, but when you're not, it's it's like torture.
Excellent. So when we finally get around to having you as our featured artist with Queensland Baroque, and we're actually going to do Bohemian repertoire. What would be your go-to temperament there? Would you still stick with Young, do you think, or?
Or Werkmeister, or that's a good question. I usually go for 6 comma mean tone. So because I just feel like it works best, particularly in Bohemian repertoire. There's a lot of double stops and things like that, and it's often what's meant to be with organ most of the time. So if you want your double stops to be in tune with the organ, then
sort of very, 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 very pure thirds. And that sort of thing.
Yeah. So 6. I'd probably go for 6 comma mean tone for Bohemian stuff. And it's just it's actually, I think, probably my favourite period and style of music. I love it. It's got so much in it. Very inventive, very atmospheric.
Oh no, it's brilliant. I heard you. Was it a little video you guys made? Was it Spear or Petzel or someone?
Petzel, yeah.
Petzel, yeah. He's one of my favourites, and I always thought it'd be great to have an album. You know, you could have Spear and Petzels. I don't know what we'd call the album cover, but you know.
There's so much great music, and you know, to think that they were, you know, Petzel had a huge output, and there's so much. Again, he's one that just trying to go through all that repertoire would be so interesting. There's so much there.
Enough, you know, it doesn't get played that often. You know, performed live. But it's beautiful music.
It's good outdoor music, actually. Maybe it's good for a post-COVID-19 era. Outdoors, out of the vapors.
Yeah, that's right. Excellent. Hey, well, I've been riveted to listen to what you've had to say, and thank you again so much for joining us. And would you maybe even come back again when we get the technology sorted out a bit better?
Yeah, sure. Happy to.
Yeah, and we can pick your brain a little bit more. That would be awesome.
Yeah, all right.
And for any Queensland Baroque fans out there, we're definitely having Julia later in the year. We've only postponed her concert that was due to be today. So we'll keep in touch and let everyone know what's happening. But thanks for everyone that tuned in, and thank you again, Julia, very much for taking the time to talk to us. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
No worries. All the best.
Thanks. See ya.
See ya.
And if I can jump in, John and I are doing a live stream on this channel again on it'll be Friday morning at 10 o'clock, featuring a few of John's recordings, and it's just me and John having a chat and going over our favourite recordings. And I also have a live stream on Tuesday morning for my other fans on Schumann's Dichterliebe. So that'll be here on this channel.
Great.
All right.
Thanks again.
I'll end the live stream. Yeah. But I'll keep you on Zoom so we can have a chat. But I'll end the live stream.